Okay, right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Good.
Very good.
Good.
Excellent.
Very good.
Excellent.
Great.
Now, we've made this panel session fairly short because I think, as you're going to reflect very soon, there's not been a huge amount of stuff said about containers so far. So I'm going to shut my mouth for a bit though, and actually let you all introduce yourselves, and then let's get into some of the highlights, some of the things that we can share. Ricardo, I'd like you to start by introducing yourself, please.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Ricardo Sueiras. I'm an advocate for open source at AWS.
Super. Jamie, you next, please.
Hi, I'm Jamie Walker, Solutions Architect at Steamhouse.
Excellent. Rob?
Rob Greenwood, Tech Director at Steamhouse.
Excellent. And then Bruno, please, up at the top.
Hi, everyone. Bruno. I work at Fortum as Head of Technology and Architecture.
Okay, good. Right, well, as you were the last to be introduced, can you go first, Bruno, to actually give us your thoughts and reflections so far on containers out of reInvent?
Sure. It's been a bit kind of dry on terms of new announcements. Maybe they are saving the best for last, perhaps, or not, I don't know. But definitely hasn't been much coming about containers. Quite a lot of things, for instance, like around ECR. That's been some of the things there. And also clearly on the marketplace with expanding a bit the program to allow partner workloads to deploy on Kubernetes. That's something that also caught my attention because the container program has been very specifically mostly about DCS. One thing that I was reflecting is that even though there hasn't been that much announcements within this week of reInvent, in the past weeks, there has been quite a lot of things about containers. And that was maybe the most surprising part for me, that maybe they were trying to announce the things during the past weeks to try to create a buzz about those before this week. As we know, this week ends up being quite a lot of maybe too many things at the same time. So perhaps that was the strategy there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we've got a video with the senior product manager for ECR. We've got an interview with him that we're going to play at some point during this panel session. So he might go into some of those. Rob, you were mentioning just before something that you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, so I think one of the, following on from what Bruno said, I think one of the releases sort of building up to reInvent was Carpenter, which is specifically for Kubernetes, but is aimed at being a cluster autoscaler replacement. So, but for kind of running hardware in response to containers. So a bit like Fargate, but being able to do it on your own sort of EC2 instances rather than having to use Fargate. It's kind of a little bit of an open source competitor to Spot, I would say. So quite an interesting release from AWS. Obviously, Spot also has its advantages, but yeah, Carpenter looks really interesting. So yeah, very keen to sort of have a play around with that.
Yeah, I checked out there was a session. I'm not sure if it was just a demo on the containers from the couch people, but they went through and walked through actually how to set up and use Carpenter and some of the unique selling points of it. And I think what they were really talking about was the flexibility in how you can choose the different configurations within your scaling groups, but also the speed and response. Right, that was the big thing. It's really around how to increase the response times and reduce the latency for your scaling events, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, I haven't had an opportunity to actually play around with it yet, but one of the things I did notice was it does also seem to support Fargate as well, which kind of suggests that you can essentially provision containers, both on physical, virtual hardware, but also onto Fargate, and sort of you're almost letting Kubernetes decide itself where the sort of best place to run containers is. So yeah, that does sound very interesting. And
also, it's potentially extensible, right? So it's an open framework. So at the moment, it is geared to EKS and Kubernetes, and I think it supports MLOps as well. But I'm not 100%. I'm not overly familiar with Kubernetes, but they did say that you could create a pull request and integrate, for example, maybe GCP or Azure into that as well. So I think that's going to be interesting to see what the community does in that space. I mean, touching upon the ECR stuff, back to the ECR stuff, I think that I actually there was one thing that they maybe didn't dive deep into, which was the security scanning update. Because obviously, you've always been able to scan images in ECR, right? And actually, it's pretty cool. Actually, it's a really nice feature. Not so nice when you're demoing it and your image that you're using comes up red, right? That's not so good. But what they announced is that they're kind of like extending the functionality now. So it's not just the container image that's scanned, but also the libraries you're using as well within your images as well. So that's a nice little feature, and it's continuous as well, which means it's not just a one time when you publish, which I thought was pretty cool. And that all the reports then can go to your reporting hub. So if you're using Security Hub, for example, there's nice integration. So you've got that single place to receive notifications around, those dodgy container images you're building. So
you can enable that at the organization level, right, as well. So that makes management a bit easier.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and one thing they didn't talk about directly, I don't think, but it is in Deepak's container leadership session. So if you haven't seen that, it's definitely worth checking out. And that is that there's a standard, a Notary V2 standard, okay, which allows you to sign images at an organizational level and to provide that kind of extra level of I guess confidence that the images you're using are the ones you think you're using. And that was support for that was announced as well. So it's definitely worth looking into that as well, I think.
Yeah, sure.
I think go on, Jamie.
Sorry, I was going to say one of the most important, or kind of prominent features for me, or releases for me, was the pull-through cache. It's going to be very useful for many of our customers. Being able to cache images from public registries into your private ECR repos. You get all the benefits of ECR. One of the use cases that I think would be quite good for our customers is for their build pipelines, so their image build pipelines. When most of the time they're pulling from images on hosted on rate limited public registries and stuff. So definitely come in and make their lives a lot easiher.
Yeah, definitely.
I would like to add on that. I think those announcements on ECR were clearly also like a stab at Docker on the ability, of course, to now that the public images of Docker will be part of the ECR public. That's kind of like a clear step. One thing that I didn't saw, and I was kind of half expecting, or I'm still half expecting it to happen, is that something along the lines of basically freeing organizations from having to use Docker. In essence, for instance, that now in was it January or February, any big company that uses Docker Desktop will need to pay for it mandatorily. Even if you're just using it to build your own images on if you're not using any of the capabilities that Docker Desktop gives. And that might be something that I'm still like half expecting, that maybe something along of enhanced Podman or something like that to kind of fulfill that gap, because otherwise I kind of feel that people will end up using the Docker Desktop and kind of Docker Hub as a consequence of it. But let's see. There's still time this week.
There is. I mean, there absolutely is. We've not even had Werner's keynote yet, have we? So there's a quite a high likelihood that there will be further big announcements made in that. So Dave, I'm just going to give you about a 15-second warning that we're going to ask you to play the interview with Sravan, the product manager for ECR, which, because everybody's talked about that so far, so that's clearly the highlight of the announcements. And then when we come back from that, guys, I'm going to ask you to share perhaps the sessions that you would direct people to go and watch if hope that's not springing a surprise on you. Yeah, so containers related sessions. After we've played this VT, we'll come back and we'll get your thoughts on that. Okay, so a bunch of ECR announcements from, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, the horse's mouth. And that is where, that's where we're all, those are some of the key highlights. But Jamie, I think you were going to tell us about another one before we go to these sessions that...
Yeah, so it's a pre-event announcement actually, but it's the announcements for Graviton 2 support for Fargate. So I understand it delivers up to like 40% better price performance and 20% lower costs, like compared to Intel base 86, like Fargate containerized applications. So, it's quite decent improvements there. I think Ricardo, in the discussion beforehand, it was something we both wanted to discuss. So I'll hand over to Ricardo for him to add to that, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I've been waiting for this for a long time. I actually did a talk at DevOps World in September, and it was about creating multi-architecture CI/CD pipelines. And I used ECS, but I had to use effectively EC2 instances, right? Because I couldn't use Fargate because I wanted to have x86 and Graviton based instance types. But now, of course, I can go back and revisit that and do it with Fargate, which is cool. So I'm a massive fan of ARM generally. I think because of it's not just the price performance, right? But it's actually the efficiency and the potential to have like 40% or 50% lower power consumption. I think is super cool without sacrificing performance. So I'm super happy to see what happens, and I think obviously we need ARM based images. So folks who are watching, start cross compiling images on x86 and ARM. Never been easier.
Cool. Bruno, did you have anything else to add in terms of pre-reInvent announcements?
Yes, I have three things. They are not three things that particularly excite me personally, but I know that it helps a lot of organizations. And I know that Adrian is on the back line rooting for this one, is his favorite, that now you can have Fargate's Windows container support. I'm pretty sure it's his favorite thing. Other thing is the ECS Anywhere that now supports GPUs, so that this has particularly good applications for organizations that have invested in specific hardware in their outside AWS, and they can bring that to the ECS world. And the other one is now that App Runner supports CDK. And I think that's also like a very good thing because a lot of simple workloads, container-based, can be now running in App Runner, and CDK has a lot of enthusiastic supporters. So I'm quite happy with that, even though I don't personally use it.
Good. Okay. And then to round off this panel session then, Rob, I think you've got a couple of sessions that you would signpost people towards.
Yeah, so I think Ricardo had already mentioned the containers on AWS leadership session that was yesterday, I think. So that's now on demand. So yeah, I mean that's a great starting point for anyone interested in containers. I think also today is the infrastructure keynote. So I wouldn't necessarily expect any major container announcements there, but it's certainly an interesting keynote to join to get a bit of an understanding of what's actually running the containers. And Graviton, I think, is a great example of a sort of technology that you'll find out a lot more about in those types of sessions, and just how it scales generally. So I think those are currently my two recommendations.
Yeah, the lead session is great because he talks about lots of things right around customers using it, and there's a big up to the Graviton stuff there. He also mentioned something we haven't talked about, which is Proton, right? And specifically in the context of how it's enabling organizations to try and move towards a GitOps model, and what GitOps is in AWS definition. So I think if you're interested in that as well, there's loads of really good stuff in that session.
Yeah, there's quite a few different sort of technologies in there, isn't there? I mean, there's the sort of running joke of there's 17 different ways of running containers on AWS. So, I think that
this week.
yeah, exactly. I think that session is quite a good way of understanding, sort of the different services that are there, what each of them are for, and why you might use a particular one over another. So, yeah, definitely recommend watching it.
Excellent. I think that brings us to time. So yeah, less than we might have expected in terms of containers announcements, but still a fair smattering there. And I think hopefully you guys will be happy to take any questions or continue the conversation in the Slack group. And Bruno, at least, and Ricardo as well. I think you're both coming back to join us for another panel session in a minute, I think, or shortly. Am I right? Maybe not.
Not me, I don't think. But
there is no plan here. It's just people rock up and talk about stuff. Yeah. So, right, good. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate your time and your insight. And we'll see you again soon. And Dave, can you play us out, please?